Let's see here. All right there. Pause the music. Good morning, party people, and welcome to Office Hours, the stream where I take your Microsoft database questions and go through them. Boy, I woke up on the wrong side of the bed this morning. My poor dog, little Beanie. I left the windows open accidentally yesterday. I mean, I opened them on purpose, but I didn't know there was a dust storm coming through Vegas. And left the windows open. Holy smokes, there was a lot of dust. I mean, not enough that you would notice it on the furniture or anything like that, but enough to where the poor dog was coughing all night, so I did not sleep well at all, and I did not understand. I thought the dog was having like some kind of health problem. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, just whoop-a-choom, I wake up and I realize, I'm like, oh, the windows are open, and that's why the dog is coughing, and jeez. Bad. Glador says, first time one of these has been running for a reasonable time. If you call reasonable time for me, if you call midnight reasonable, I'd be curious where you're at, where it's midnight. That seems like almost Australia, maybe? Because it's 5 a.m. here. It's 5 a.m. in Vegas, which is usually a pretty good time for Europeans. Not that I target Europeans, but it's just that I'm usually up first thing in the morning, and then I'm like, oh, let me just go knock out some of these top voted questions. Steve says, hi, party people. Welcome, Steve, as well. Jonas says, I'm currently looking for that DPA define microphone, the Brittany microphone that I use, but the poor people edition. I know, right? Like, if you go on Amazon, there are a bunch of those, like they call them like preacher mics or Brittany mics. But the DPA defines are just miles above what the other ones are. They're so freaking good, it's ridiculous. All right, let's see. The top voted question comes from MyTeaGotCold, and this is actually an interesting one. I'm surprised that it hasn't been asked before. MyTeaGotCold says, your HADR worksheet mentions $1 million option for 0 RPO and RTO. Where can I go learn more about this? So for those of you who haven't seen it, I have this free first responder kit. You've probably seen the first responder kit, but inside of there's a worksheet to help you pick the right architecture based on your business's recovery point objective and recovery time objective goals. And if you ask the business how much data are you willing to lose, and how long are you willing to be down, you think that the business is going to say 0 data loss and 0 downtime, but the reality is they have to understand there's a price for that. You can do that. I have clients doing it all the time. It's just that it's really, really expensive. And so in the price grid, I put $1 million and up option. The reason why you don't see like articles, here's how you achieve that objective, is because it's a lot like building a race car. Building a race car is so incredibly specialized when you get to the point of like Formula One or IndyCar. It's so incredibly specialized, and the decisions that you make are really custom tailored to what your company's abilities are, what your company's application is like, what your company's infrastructure is like, that no two solutions are the same. A good starting point to think about is bidirectional replication, where you can write to any number of SQL servers and they're all communicating with each other, so that if one SQL server goes down, you can continue writes on the others. Now, even just me saying that opens up all kinds of what happens if a change hits one SQL server but doesn't make it to the others. There are all kinds of things that you have to think about in this. It is not something where you'll just go read a one-page article telling you how to do it. This is very much where you hire a consultant to help you go, first off, even ask all the questions that needed to be asked in order to design a solution like this. I haven't looked at that RPO and RTO worksheet in a really long time, and I think I probably should change that price tag to $10 or $100 million, because I just don't see companies doing that who spend less than, say, $10 million a year on their SQL Server infrastructure just to support that one solution. So hopefully that helps. Next up, Trushit asks, hi Brent, it was good to see you at PASS. What is one thing that you learned at PASS that made you go, that sounds cool? Definitely Copilot in SSMS. I think that Microsoft is making good investments there. It's just that we're probably a year away from true usefulness. So that's a really long timeline in today's fast-paced AI evolution. So I'm worried that it won't ever ship and catch on before people just switch to using ChatGPT in a browser, for example. Next up, username Fabricated says, "Hi Brent, have you done much performance tuning work with Fabric Data Warehouse?" None. So Fabric Data Warehouse, the problem with it there is Microsoft keeps rewriting what it is every 3 years. It's data Allegro, it's PDW, it's massively parallel something or other, it's Azure SQL DW, it's going to be done in Hadoop. You know, like every 3 years they kept redoing that technology. And as a consultant, if I spend any time learning and tuning a technology that Microsoft's going to deprecate and replace within 3 years, then I lost my shirt. I can't afford to do that. You'll see people who get paid by Microsoft do that kind of work, but otherwise you're just flushing money down the toilet. It's not a great investment in terms of your career. Next up, Jack asks, "Hi Brent, I've changed the fill factor on a table from 90% to 100%. After I rebuilt the indexes, the table size got bigger. Is there a reason for this?" Okay, so there can be many reasons for this, and to do it, I would really have to see your table in your specific scenario, but I'll give you one example. If someone turned on RCSI, Read Committed Snapshot Isolation, that adds a 14-byte timestamp to every row. If someone had turned that on after a bunch of rows had been written and then you rebuilt the indexes, that timestamp is now added to every row, which blows up the size of the table. And that won't really help you much on older data. There's no reason to have that 14-byte timestamp when the data isn't changing. That is just one example. There are many more, but that's where, if you wanted to see more, that's where you could start. Next up, Bandhu says, "We don't have a development SQL Server with customer data, so our engineers test and code on production with live customer data. Our customer data isn't allowed outside of production. What bad stuff have you seen from this scenario?" Well, Bandhu, what bad stuff do you think that I've seen from this scenario? If people are developing in production, what bad stuff do you suppose might happen? I bet that if you use your imagination, you can think of times where you've made a mistake and you've accidentally deleted the wrong data, you've updated the wrong data, you've deployed the wrong code. Bandhu, do you really need me to answer that question? I bet you don't. I bet you could figure that one out on your own. Next up, Lewis says, "Hi Brent, in what scenario is it recommended to deploy more than one instance of SQL Server in production?" For me, never. That technique is called instance stacking. Anytime I need another SQL Server instance, I'll deploy another VM, separate VMs for each instance of SQL Server. So you might ask me why, and the answer to that is in your follow-up question. Your follow-up question says, "How are resource conflicts such as CPU, I/O, and network bottlenecks handled?" They're not. SQL Server has no awareness of other instances on the same box, so you run into all kinds of problems with CPU contention, memory contention, and so forth. I don't want to have to troubleshoot that when there's nothing built into SQL Server to help me troubleshoot that. So that's why I would never, ever, 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 ever do that, take that approach. Let's see here. Some good, like Glad's note is good inside there in Twitch chat. Elijah says, "There are hundreds or thousands of applicants for the positions that I find on LinkedIn. How do you recommend getting a new role in this market?" Never rely. So I'm going to say the advice that I'm going to give you here should be your first option. It's not your only option, but your first option. Your first option should be go contact everyone that you've ever worked with. Every developer, every sysadmin, every network admin, every DBA, every report writer, every stakeholder, every former manager, every help desk person. They are the network who will help you get your next job because they know you. They know the quality of your work. They know that you're dedicated. They know that you're a good employee. They know that you hardly ever drink on the job. And when you do, you usually have a good reason. Now, right about now, a lot of you are like I was early on in my career, and you're like, wait a minute, I don't have any of them in my address book. Right, you need to start working on that today. Today, right now, start gathering the contacts of the people who work around you. Anytime somebody leaves, I want you to set yourself a reminder to go email them once a month and go check in. How's it going? How's the new gig? What have you been up to? What problems are you facing over there? You're not asking them for another job, you're just staying in touch with them so that when all hell breaks loose, you can actually have a relationship with a bunch of people around there and then shoot them emails and texts and say, here's what I'm looking for. That should be your first option. Go start on that today. I know that your current coworkers, managers, developers, all those kinds of things aren't going to help you get your next job right now. I'm thinking even 1 month from now, 2 months from now, they'll be able to help because they're moving on too, because they hate your company too as well. Next up, Lewis Hamilton says, hi Brent, have you considered doing a podcast for office hours? We used to. The problem is I am personally 100% maxed out in terms of the time that I can spend doing things like this. I literally have no time left at all. Like I work as hard as I possibly want to work. So anything new that I would take on, like putting it into podcast format, dealing with the intro and outro, getting it uploaded to services, we hired a contractor to do that, and so I want to say it was like $100 per podcast, and we just got to the point where I was like, I don't really want to spend that $100 a podcast on there. Me personally, I never listened to podcasts, so I didn't really see the point during the pandemic where nobody was commuting to work anyway. I should probably revisit that for 2025, but that right there is the answer. Why? It just costs money. Next up, Jessica asks, Shane says, was Lewis Hamilton a DBA? It's always funny to see the names. I don't catch a lot of the name jokes. And when I do catch them, I always laugh out loud because I'm like, oh, that's an interesting name. Oh, Lewis Hamilton, okay. Jessica says, when you were in Iceland on the Digital Nomad Visa, did you have any issues with language barriers? Jessica, this is so funny. It only happened once. And I can tell you exactly when it happened. So Iceland is a very tourist-friendly country. Lots of folks over there speak English, more than enough to deal with tourists. But I can tell you one time where I was staying in a remote area of Iceland. People think Iceland's remote to begin with, but I was in a remote area of a remote country for several months during the height of the pandemic, and I needed a haircut. And so I went to a local hair salon and, it was just one woman working there and she spoke hardly any English whatsoever. She was dumbfounded that an American would come all the way to Iceland and live there during the pandemic. And I'm like showing her pictures on my phone of this is what I used to look like. Can you cut my hair to look like this? So that was the only time that it ever happened. And I ended up going back to her repeatedly, which was really funny. So she knew me as like her American friend who got haircuts, which was funny. Next up, rlidzydba. That's a kind of a fancy name there. Says, hi Brent, I have an extended event to capture information about failed login attempts. I want to have an alert fire a job. No, you do not want that. You do not want failed login attempts to fire a job. Nope, let me stop you right there. Because as soon as somebody does, if somebody wants to take your SQL Server down, they will do a denial of service attack by simply trying to log in and failing. That is a common script kiddie approach where they will just try repeated passwords against an account that can't be locked out like SA, and you'll have so many instances of that job piled up. So let me stop you right there. You do not want to do that. Now, what you want to do instead is just simply log the failed logins and then go sweep them up with some other process that reads from that file, but don't start jobs. Next up, DBA Vale says, "Hi Brent, I'm wondering about linked servers created to themselves, like server A would create a linked server to server A." No, 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 you do not want to do that either. It says, if the local server exists and someone creates it, does that process go out to the network, or is SQL Server smart enough to stay local? No, it is not. It will go out to the network. It will come back. Worse than that, it will not cache the data at all. So every time you run the query, it'll go out over the network, come back in, run the linked server query, pull the data back out across the network and back in, effectively cutting your memory in half, because those data pages are stored twice. They're stored in the original SQL Server and they're stored in your linked server results in your working set there. Do not do this. I had a client actually do this, where they used one linked server. Depending on whether they were in prod or dev or QA, they would point it to different places, and the performance issues were horrific. Do not do that. It's a great question. It's very amusing. I love that I actually had to see that issue, but there you go. Gustav and G Surgeon, good to see y'all. Got Amsterdam in the house here. Yoga Blocks asks, I'm a new hire at a medium-sized company. We don't anonymize, that's a weird word, anonymize customer data for our dev server. Where does the push come from to anonymize customer data? Is it security or compliance? And is it my responsibility to bring this to management's attention? I'm a huge fan of just saying anything that makes you nervous, you should put in writing to your manager. And here's the way that I approach it, and I do the same thing with clients, is I tell them verbally first. I say, hey, heads up, I found this thing. I can see customer data over in our dev environment. That strikes me as kind of sketchy, because if anybody queries the dev server, they could export that data, they could sell it to hackers, they could take a backup of the dev database. We don't really secure it anyway. That makes me nervous for those reasons. Do you have any questions of, oh, geez, my camera. Heat immediately. This is probably going to overheat immediately. Hold on. Let's see. Let's try switching over to that and see what happens. Okay, so in space, no one can hear you scream. It's not a battery issue. No, that's a great question. Mild Manner John said, "Is it a battery issue?" No, it's the camera that I'm using. I had it set to record in 4K 60 for some reason, and unfortunately, it overheats after a certain number of minutes and won't record more. I had totally forgotten about that. I need to replace that camera today, actually. I'm going to make myself a note so that I don't forget. And you notice how my refresh rate sucks now. Like, my refresh rate is now down to 24p. It was nice and buttery 64p. I'm going to say, Brento, go get Canon R7. Make myself a note of that. I'm going to go just do that today, because there's probably Black Friday sales on that too as well. But these Sonys, I really love, Jessica says you look better in 4K 60. I agree. I think it looks so much better. It looks, the background looks better. It's so much better. I really love the Sony cameras, but all of them just have this stupid problem where at 4K 60, they overheat. And I'm like, come on now, this is just ridiculous. So I gotta do some camera shopping here today. Hopefully, now that I've got it scaled down to 1080, 24, it should at least get to the point where we should be able to get through more questions. And it's funny too, because I use these recordings for like TikTok, and so only the questions we answered so far will actually make it to TikTok. The rest will not. Whoa. So let's see here. So yoga blocks, I think I nailed that answer pretty well there. Oh, no. So I was saying, so I put it in verbally first, and I just tell them, hey, here's the thing that scares me off. And then I say, all right, now are we on the same page? Do you have any questions about it? What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go put this in writing to you, but I wanted to give you the warning first, heads up, just to be scared so that everybody understands why. Now I'm going to go put it in writing. Is there anything that I need to say when I put it in writing to help you make it easier for you to just forward it up the chain so that you can forward it over to security or compliance or whoever it is that you need to forward it to? I'm not asking you to do anything about it. I'm just saying that I would be a bad developer or database administrator if I didn't put this stuff in writing. I would be liable for whatever problems happen, and I need to cover my own self. I'm sorry that I have to do this. I'm not trying to pin the blame on you as a manager. This is just that I got to cover myself. I know you have to cover yourself too. So is there anything that I can put in the email to make it easier for you? Because I know it's not your fault either. It might actually be their fault, but this way I come off as real humble and simple, and it makes it really easy. Chris says, which car got demoted to the driveway with the new 911? So I have 3 garage spots. And right now I don't have a car in the dining room, and I got to go just because of weirdness with seasons, and I have friends coming to visit. Andy Mallon in the SQL Server community is here today, actually, and we're going to go race cars in the desert today. So I wanted to keep the Speedster out so that we could have our choice of cars for driving it. So right now, the 3 cars in the garage are the Speedster, the old 356, coupe with the Gulf paint job, and the brand new Porsche 911. Out in the driveway is my Land Rover Defender and my Cadillac. Cadillac's been up for sale for a little while too. Not that it's not, I love it, I just don't have any more space. And it was the kind of time where I was like, oh, going into the winter, I don't really need it. It's best in the summer when I have air conditioning. It has air conditioning. It's nice as for summer drives. So what I'm going to do is today we're going to go racing in the desert. Then after that, I'm going to back the Speedster into the house because it's a convertible. I don't even use the convertible top. I took the convertible top off, threw it in the garage. So I'll put the Speedster in the house. Then left in the garage will be the Porsche 911, the 356, probably the Defender, and then I'm going to put the Cadillac will still be up for sale, but I'm just going to throw it in storage. I love the Cadillac, but just to have it in storage, I'm going to guess it's going to be $60 a month here in Vegas. Keep it in storage and insured, and then bring it back out for next summer because I truly love it. But I've also thought about shipping it up to my dad's house in Michigan. My dad has a house in Michigan, and he has a giant garage, huge space. So he'd enjoy driving it too. He'd have fun with it. We'd have to sit it in there inside the garage all winter. You wouldn't really want to drive a car like that in the winter up in Michigan, but it's a great car to play around with in the summer up there. Next up, Sports Fan asks a really interesting question. What's the current best practice for creating a dev environment or getting devs access to test data? Okay, so you asked best process. The best practice is to create your own synthetic data from scratch. Nothing to do with production data whatsoever. Because truly developers don't need access to production data if they're not doing troubleshooting or performance tuning. They shouldn't need to see exactly the same data. So you asked what the best practice is. That's the one. Generate random test data to use. Things become a little bit different with when you need to performance tune something. Or when you need to troubleshoot production problems. But anything that you go away from creating random test data, that would be fake. Now, those of you who are subscribers are not seeing an ad right now. I have a monitor up that shows me what the people see. Those of you who are still with me, you're subscribers, thank you very much. I appreciate you. And you don't have to see an ad about Mike Tyson taking on Jake Paul, which I just think is the dumbest thing. I think it's here in Vegas even. And I just don't understand why people would want to watch something like that. It strikes me as so stupid. Look, if it's your thing, that's totally cool. No, it's not cool. Why would you want to watch some 60-year-old professional boxer who's unbelievable, who's just known for dominating and beating the bejesus out of somebody, take on a YouTuber? I recognize that Jake Paul is bulky for a YouTuber, but he's a YouTuber. Makes no sense. We'll do one more. Let's see here. Jessica Phoenix says, I'm trying to figure out where to do a digital nomad for the next 4 years, a combination of countries to get the whole time. One thing you can't, so I'm going to throw out from my experience, a few things to be aware of. Iceland is wonderful. The internet is fantastic, but of course the seasons are tricky. It's up to you. Not everybody can survive with 24 hours of daylight and 24 hours of darkness, depending on where you're at. Look at WeatherSpark. All one word, WeatherSpark, and put in the name of the location that you want to go to. WeatherSpark is phenomenal because it has a compare cities option. So pull up the city that you're thinking about going to, then find the compare button, and then you can compare it to your current city, and it has beautiful overlays of what the differences are in daylight, humidity, pool score, sunshine hours, all kinds of crazy stuff. It's great. So not everybody can handle that. And also Iceland is a little bit on the expensive side. I would compare it to living in California. You can spend less by living in less attractive parts of California. Same thing with Iceland. And they max out at 9 months with the Digital Nomad Visa. That's an absolute max. It's in the Schengen area, so if you stay even for 6 months, you have to leave the Schengen area for another 6 months. So those are the pros and cons of using Iceland in the rotation. Mexico, way friendlier. Mexico doesn't give a damn. You can stay as long as you want. You have to leave, I think it's 1 day every 6 months. You just have to leave the country and then come back in just so that you go through immigration. As long as you're not working for Mexican companies, and they really don't care. They kind of look the other way. Don't take this as legal advice. Obviously, I'm not a lawyer or a tax attorney, but it's so easy there. Mexico is the one that I'd really recommend. Thailand just announced a better digital nomad visa, but it's still kind of a pain in the rear and involves some bureaucracy and paperwork. I can't say enough good stuff about the combo of Iceland and Mexico. Oh, Jessica says, looking at Iceland, then Argentina to stay cold. To stay cold the whole time. That's funny. Let's see here. It still got, it reminds me of MTV Celebrity Deathmatch. That's true. So the one other question that we had in here, I'm a Potato says, hi, I'm trying to reduce disk latency. My tempdb files are 255 milliseconds average write stall. I've seen that you can move tempdb to local storage. Can you use it in a virtualized environment with live motion enabled? No, because of course you can't move a VM from place to place if it's relying on local storage. Generally speaking, if you need to solve that problem, you use failover clusters. So you have a failover cluster with multiple nodes. Each node does not move around, but each node has local solid state storage. So then if that one VM host fails, you can fail over the cluster to that other node in the cluster. All right, well, that's a good run for me then. I guess I got to go troubleshoot, go replace this camera. That blows because I love this camera. Everything else I love about this is a Sony, I think it's called a ZV-E1. It's a full frame camera. Just does beautiful, buttery, delicious video when it's at 4K, but man, can't do it for extended periods of time, so I got to go fix that. The reason why it's a problem for me now, So the reason why it's a problem is I just changed my laptop. I just switched over to a brand new, let's see here, I'll switch oh, you can kind of see it there. I just switched over to a brand new MacBook Pro, the new M4 chips. I've been running a 2021 MacBook Pro for the longest time, for like 3 years. It's not the longest time, it's 3 years. It was a 2021 MacBook Pro. And it was great, but the fastest it could ingest video, because I got multiple cameras. I got the one you're looking through, and then I got another camera behind here that's another Sony. Between the two of those, plus doing everything else it needed to do to manage the live stream, all it could handle was two 1080p camera feeds at like 24 to 30 frames per second. And even then it was a little jittery. Now this freaking monster, the new M4 Max, can do multiple 4K 60 feeds, and it looks glorious. Doesn't stutter at all. Uses like 5% CPU. Utterly amazing, but now I gotta upgrade the cameras so that they can actually push it. Mild manner, oh, hold on a second here. There were a couple of things. Stilgart says, good purchase on the M4s. Yeah. Mild manner John says, how do you find the DJI mics? They're awesome. This thing is phenomenal. I utterly love it. And it has a receiver that plugs directly into Sony cameras. So that is one thing that I'll miss. It's a totally digital end-to-end feed, which is really cool. But since the Sony cameras have other problems, I'll just use analog. Jonah says, I have the Elgato prompter. Yes, and I love these a lot. I don't use it for prompting, but I use it for Zoom calls. It's phenomenal for Zoom calls. You can kind of see the screen inside there. I use it for Zoom calls all the time. I put the Zoom meeting up there with everybody's cameras, so then I am looking directly at the camera, which has a nicer experience. When I do training classes, when I record training classes, I'll put the chat up there so I can look directly at the student chat as they ask questions, which is really nice. King Coconut Crab says, great purchase indeed on the M4s. Jessica says, when do you install Windows on the Mac? I don't, actually. I don't use Windows at all anymore. You'll see me use it all the time in blog posts. But all I'm doing is remote desktoping into a jump box. I have jump boxes up in AWS. And the only reason that I do that is just to give people a comfortable interface that they're used to. But when I work in either dbeaver or Azure Data Studio, dbeaver and Azure Data Studio, because most of my work these days is a mix of Postgres and Azure Data Studio. And of course, when I'm working with clients, I control their desktop. We work on their desktop together, which is typically Windows, but not always. All right, well, thanks for hanging out with me. Sorry about the little camera troubles there, and hope y'all have a good weekend. I am off to go do some camera shopping. I will see y'all on the next office hours. Adios.